Okay, and let me present my screen, displaying the screen. Now, can you all see my screen? Let's take approval. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Where are we? We stayed here. We described the common things of these occupations. So we uttered three things that the jobs have in common. The first was, as Sarp, you describe it. Sarp, can you hear me? Batuhan, what was the first thing in common? Sıla? Simay, can you hear me? Can you speak?
Yes, teacher.
So, three things in common these three occupations have. What was the first one?
Am I read?
You don't need to read, you just describe. You see, how do we call it? And that one, and this one.
Engineer, pilot,
Engineer.
and doctor.
Yes, they all have uniforms, right?
Yes.
They have to wear a uniform. It can be visual to see, to make people understand that she's a pilot, or protective to
Pilot.
protect themselves. They have goggles, masks, and this guy has helmet to protect his head, and this lady as well. So the first is the uniform these occupations have in common. The next is safety. They have to stay safe thanks to this helmet, mask, and maybe she has a parachute. Because the helmet cannot save her from the danger, and maybe the sense of being cautious. They don't have a possibility to fail. If engine fails, if engineer fails, so the building can be ruined. If a doctor fails, Sarp, are you here now?
Yeah, I just joined, sorry.
Okay, if a doctor fails, what if a doctor fails?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat again?
So what if a doctor fails in an operation, dies or becomes an invalid?
Yes.
Or maybe something worse for a lifetime. If a pilot fails,
No.
we may see, a big danger. So the consequence is enormous.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why they have to be cautious. The most attentive, they should be the most attentive in their business. Okay, now let's go. So I have a connection problem, so that works. Let's wait for a while. I cannot scroll it, so we have to wait for a while. Sir, can we stop screaming because we have a failure here? I cannot scroll it. So I'm leaving. I'm entering in a minute.
Arkadaşlar Taha Hoca nereye gitti?
Onun meet'i bozuldu da çıkıp girecekmiş.
Ha dedim. Ha, tamam.
Gelir şimdi, merak etmeyin.
Sorry for the failure. So I'm here again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
sure.
I had a connection problem, so I had to close the presentation and reload it again. So we can go on. All right. So a checklist. The checklist manifesto by author Gawande. We're going to read it, starting with the first and how they work and how they take measures against failure. We have 5 parts, passages here. And the first goes to Sarp. Can you start reading it, please? A doctor in a large hospital.
There's no presentation right now.
Yeah. So I have to make everything again.
Probably.
Actually, it's recording. So and let's make it spotlight and present. Yes. Now. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
So, yeah, can you start reading it, please? A doctor in a large hospital.
All right. A doctor in a large hospital walked into an operating theater where an operation was being performed. Everything seemed to be going well, but the doctor noticed that no one was wearing a face mask. He was surprised. Wearing a face mask is a basic hospital procedure, but he didn't say anything. The operation was a success, but a few days later, the patient came down with a fever. It turned out that she had a serious infection, probably because the doctors and nurses hadn't followed the simple rule. If they'd worn their masks, the patient wouldn't have been infected.
Thank you for reading. It's an excellent reading, man. So let's analyze it. So a doctor in a large hospital walked into an operating room. Can you describe it? What do people do here?
Operates.
Yeah, they operate people. And operation is performed in this room. Performing, that means to carry out, to fulfill, right? To do something. And everything seemed to be going well, but the doctor noticed. That means Sıla, do you remember the difference between realize and notice? Sıla. Boğaçan, do you remember the difference between notice and realize? Murathan?
Yes, I can actually
So the
give an
difference
example.
notice and realize. The
So,
difference between these two verbs.
let's say something bad happens, and then you realize that it was your fault. Fark ediyorsun yani. Farkına varıyorsun daha doğrusu.
Farkına varmak ve fark etmek.
Hı hı.
Güzel. Çok iyi. Notice is fark etmek. Realize is farkına varmak. So realize has the result, right?
Hocam örneğin realize'da kendi hatamızı fark ediyoruz. Ama notice'de de şey değil miydi?
Şöyle bir vakayı düşünelim. Someone is painting a chair, but you don't know it, and you sit on this chair. You didn't notice whether it was painted or not. You didn't notice, and you sat.
Hı hı.
And then you realize that your trousers were painted by yeah. So notice has the first, it goes first, and realize goes next. Realize has result meaning. Fark etmeden oturuyorsun, sonra farkına varıyorsun. Realize yani farkına varmak.
Hı hı.
Sonuç içeriyor. Bu şekilde söyleyebiliriz. The doctor noticed that no one was wearing a face but he didn't say anything. The operation was a success, but a few days later, the patient calmed down with a fever. Fever, a high temperature, right? And calm down with, how can we translate it into Turkish? Calm down with. Başvurmak şeklinde söyleyebilir miyiz?
Hocam. Fear, what's the meaning of fear, teacher?
Hocam ben Mert Hoca'nın yanındaydım da şimdi geldim hemen.
Yüksek ateş. Come down with. So they come with a complaint. And it turned out that she had a serious infection. Turn out. Who can describe this phrasal verb? Turn out. Berk, do you remember it? Turn out. Fever, for example, can be a serious thing, serious disaster. But when they examine the patient, they make things clear. So turn out, become clear. Become clear. It became clear that she had a serious infection. Ortaya çıkmak diyebiliriz buna. Probably because the doctors and nurses hadn't followed the simple rule. If they had worn their masks, the patient wouldn't have been infected. So we see here a conditional. Is it 0, first, second? Purple place. Sarp. Is
Teacher,
it,
we cannot hear
you cannot hear what?
you.
Hear me?
Yes. Now, okay.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Good. So, if they had worn their masks, the patient wouldn't have been infected. What conditional do we see here? Is it 0, first, second, or third? Muratan. Past simple and followed by past simple. Nazmi? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Burada hangi şartlı cümle var? Biliyorsun. Conditionals'lar. Zero.
Ben Nazmi değildim. Direkt bize sordunuz zannettim o yüzden ya.
Sen cevaplayabilir misin?
Bakayım hocam, tekrar sorabilir misiniz?
If they had worn their masks, the patient wouldn't have been infected.
Neyi
Burada
cevap?
ne mana var? Bu cümlede ne mana çıkıyor ortaya?
I don't know hocam.
Who knows it? 10A, 10B. Who knows the meaning?
It means, can I say that in Turkish?
Tabii ki.
Ya şey demek istiyor sanırım. Şimdi yanlış olmasın ama maskelerini taksalardı bu kadar etkili olmayacaktı galiba bu hastalık. Öyle bir şey mi diyor hocam?
Evet, hasta enfekte olmazdı.
Ha, aynen.
Hı hı.
Bu
Buradaki
kadar
üçüncü derece bir koşul var burada. Üçüncü derece. Maskelerini takmış olsalardı hasta enfekte olmuş olmazdı şeklinde söyleyebiliriz. Yani buradaki şey they didn't wear their masks. Yani çıkan sonuç nedir? Onlar maskelerini takmadılar.
Evet.
Hasta enfekte oldu. İki mana çıkıyor. İki sonuç çıkıyor buradan. Hasta enfekte oldu. Onlar maskelerini takmadılar.
Evet
Yani
hocam.
onlar maskelerini takmış olsalardı hasta enfekte olmuş olmazdı. Buradaki unreal, gerçekleşmemiş bir şey. Hipotez yani bir nevi, varsayım.
Hı hı.
Gerçekleşmemiş bir durum var. Geriye dönüş de yok buradan. Artık hasta enfekte olmuş, bitmiş.
Aynen hocam.
Bu şekilde bunları göreceğiz. Bu koşulların zero'dan başlayıp sıfırdan 1, 2, 3 şeklinde. Sıfır nedir mesela? Su içersin hasta olursun. Buzu ısıtırsan erir. Değil mi? Sadece bilimsel olarak bir şeyin %100 sonuç vereceğini söylersek kullanıyoruz. Bir de hızlı araba kullanırsan kaza yaparsın. If you drive fast, you will have an accident. 2'de ise ne oluyor? Hızlı kullanmasaydın kaza yapmazdın. If you didn't drive fast, you wouldn't have an accident.
Zamanlar değişiyor gibi aslında.
Evet, zamanlar değişiyor. Zamanlar kesinlikle değişiyor. Anlam olarak da değişiyor. Yani %100 kesinlikten %0 kesinliğe gidiyoruz. Bu şekilde koşullar var. 4 farklı koşul var. Onları tekrar edeceğiz sizlerle. Konumuza dönersek. I think you got it. You got this passage. We will repeat these phrasal verbs come down with and turn out they will be repeated later. Okay, let's go ahead. Someone who would be interested, Melis, can you read it?
İkinci kısmı mı hocam?
Yeah, second passage, please.
Someone who would be interested in that story is Atul Gawande, who wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto: How to Get Things Right. Gawande is a doctor himself, and in his book that suggests that if surgeons run thorough a simple
True.
checklist before every operation, then lives will be saved, and he's got the numbers to prove it. In 2001, at an important American hospital, there was an experiment that required doctors to use a 5-point checklist before they carried out specific pros. Hocam telefonunu okuyorum da göremiyorum pek fazla.
Procedures.
İsterseniz arkadaşlarım okusun.
Okay, procedures.
Devam edeyim mi hocam?
Go on, please.
The checklist was just a list of routine things doctors should normally do without thinking. For example, wearing rubber gloves, washing hands before after every patient, and so on. By making sure that the checklist was followed, there were almost infections over the 27 months of the experiment, and they reckoned that around 8 lives were saved when the checklist was tested again in hospitals in Michigan. Onu okuyamadım. USA infections went down by 66%.
Thank you for reading. I appreciate it. So, someone who would be interested in that story is Atul Gawande, who wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto. Who knows manifesto? Who can describe this term? Manifesto. The Checklist Manifesto. How do we release manifestos? When do we do it? When do we release these forms?
I don't know the exactly meaning of manifesto.
But we always hear it. We
Yes.
always read it. So something like declaration to addressing to people that you need to do something. It's kind of strict declaration. How to get things right. So because some professions cannot fail, they don't have a right to make mistakes. That's why people can release manifestos addressing to these people. And this manifesto is to get things right. And this man is a doctor himself, so in this profession, and in his book he suggests that if surgeon is a person who Batuhan, your microphone is not working. Sıla, surgeon is a person who operates.
Cerrahi değil mi hocam?
Cerrahi mi cerrah mı?
Ha, cerrah.
Cerrah. Yeah. Surgeon is a person who operates people. Operatörleri biz cerrah diyoruz. Run through a simple checklist. Run through. So just performing a simple checklist before every operation, then lives will be saved. So if surgeons do it, a simple checklist, for example, we will see this checklist here. So he's got the numbers to prove it. Let me take laser. So in 2001, at an important American hospital, there was an experiment that required doctors. Requiring doctors. Sarp, can you describe this require? Are you with us, Sarp?
Can I say that, teacher?
Do it, please.
Required means that we should must to do it.
Yes, you force people to do something. So they require doctors to use a 5-point checklist. So after this experiment, they had to use a 5-point checklist. So, and before they carried out specific procedures, carry out to arrange. Arranging, to organizing something, gerçekleştirmek. Spesifik prosedürü gerçekleştirmeden önce. The checklist was just a list of routine things doctors should normally do without thinking. For example, wearing rubber gloves, washing hands before and after every patient, ill people, right? Ill person, and so on. You see 1, 2, 3, 3 points of checklist. And by making sure that the checklist was followed, there were almost no infections over the 27 months of the experiment. And they didn't have any failure thanks to this checklist. And they reckon means they think, they assume that around 8 lives were saved. Thanks to this checklist, so the lives were saved. When this was tested again in hospitals in Michigan, USA, infections went down by 66%. Go down. Sarp, is it something good or bad? Go down. Sarp, can you hear me? Teoman?
Yes.
Go down.
Şu went down yazan mı?
Yes, it's a second and go down.
So what am I doing now?
So is it good news or bad news here?
No, it's bad news, of course.
Bad news?
Yeah. Wait, what went down? Oh, infection went down. Then it's good.
Good news, yeah. Depending on the subject.
Yeah, I didn't see the infections.
Yeah. Reduced, right?
Mhm.
Reduced
Yes.
by 66%. Azalmak. Okay, now let's see third one. Teoman, can you read it in this book?
In his book, Gawande, is that
Person.
okay? Looks at other professions too to support his argument that checklists reduce accidents and improve success rates. He points out that people like engineers and pilots use checklists all the time, and he comes up with some good examples. Just imagine that an airplane crashed because the pilot had failed to follow basic procedures. Suppose a skyscraper fell down because the engineers hadn't remembered to do some important calculations. There will be an immediate how to pronounce this? Inquiry to look into these events. So Gawande's question is, if pilots and engineers use checklists, why don't doctors use them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in this book, the person at other professions to support his argument that checklists, we see the checklists, they reduce accidents, they make accidents down, the numbers of accidents down, and improve success rates. And he point out, that means stress on that people like engineers and pilots use checklists all the time, and he comes up with some good examples. Come up with, that means they think. Good examples, just imagine that an airplane crashed because the pilot had failed to follow basic procedures. Yeah, it's possible. Suppose a skyscraper fell down because the engineers hadn't remembered to do some important calculations. Yeah, imagining a skyscraper fell down because the engineers hadn't remembered, they couldn't calculate the possible risks. Yeah, it's possible. And there would be an immediate inquiry. Who remembers it? Inquire. Melis, do you remember it?
No, I don't know.
Investigation. it means investigation. There would be an immediate. So it's a really serious disaster. Skyscraper falls down. An airplane crashes. Yeah, it's a serious event. And to look into these cases. Look into, as you remember, investigate. Inquiry is investigation. So we have two different words here having the same meaning. So Gavandi's question is, if pilots and engineers use checklists, why don't doctors use them? I think he's true and he's right to asking this question. Okay, let's go ahead. Fourth goes to Simay.
Yes, teacher.
But when Gavandi talked to doctors,
Am I read?
you're going to read it, please.
Okay. But when Gwen talked to doctors at the 8 hospitals about a checklist that he had developed, he found that a lot of them weren't very enthusiasm. 20% of the doctors then given talked to said then the listen was too difficult to use and that it wouldn't help to save lives. But when they were shown the statements, if I had surgeon, I would have to surgeon to use this list. 93% of the same doctors agreed with it. So it's hard to work out why they don't want to use its themselves.
Thank you for reading. So when he talked to doctors at 8 hospitals about the checklist that he had developed, so he developed this checklist and he found that a lot of them weren't very enthusiastic. That means, were they sportive or not, Melis? Melis, can you hear me? Sıla?
Yes, teacher.
So this man developed a checklist, right?
Yes.
Checklist was developed by him, but he found that a lot of doctors weren't very enthusiastic. Were they sportive or not? I mean, were they eager to use this checklist or not?
I
Burada
can
doktorumuz hani bir liste oluşturmuş ya, checklist oluşturmuş.
Evet.
Kontrol listesi oluşturmuş. Bu acaba o görmüş mü, kabul görmüş mü diğer doktorlar arasında? Yoksa doktorlar buna biraz mesafeli mi yaklaşmışlar?
Hocam ben orayı hatırlamıyorum ki. Yoktum
Evet.
başlarda falan.
Burada neyi görüyoruz? Doktorların onun oluşturmuş olduğu kontrol listesine karşı biraz mesafeli davranmışlar. Çok şevkli olmamışlar.
Enthusiastic, hevesli demek değil miydi?
Evet, hevesli değillermiş. Yani burada
Ha, weren't.
evet, weren't very enthusiastic. 20% of the doctors that this man talked to said that the list was too difficult to use. So 20%, one of third, right?
Yes.
Found it difficult to use. It wouldn't help to save life. But when they were shown the statement, if I had surgery, I would want the surgeon to use this list. 93% of the same doctors agreed with it. But later they agreed with the statement. If I had surgery, I would want the surgeon to use this list. So it's hard to work out why they don't want to use it themselves. So work out here, imagine. It's hard to imagine that why they don't want to use it themselves. Okay, let's end it with the fifth passage. Okay, who is it? Jansu, can you read the fifth, the checklist? Jansu, can you hear me? Ahmet?
Yes.
So can you read the fifth?
Okay. The Checklist Manifesto is a really interesting and well-written book. It reminds us to do basic things to avoid problems. It's relevant for all us, not just for doctors. We should all use checklists now and again, otherwise we will make mistakes.
Yeah, we will make mistakes. The Checklist Manifesto is a really interesting and well-written book. It reminds us to do basic things to avoid, to go away from problems. And it's relevant. Relevant, that means, Ahmet, for all of us. How can you describe this word?
Excuse me?
Can you describe this word, the meaning? Can you define it? Relevant for all of us.
I can't.
It's the same for all of us.
What do you mean?
It's the same for all of us.
Okay.
Not for doctors. As a teacher, if I use the checklist, I can teach better. As a student, if I have a
Everyone
checklist,
use it.
I can study better. As a driver, if I have a checklist, I will not have a breakdown. As a vice principal or as a principal, if I have a checklist, I will not lose something, or I will not miss the classes or something like that. So it's relevant for all of us, not only for doctors. And we should all use checklists now and again. Otherwise, we will make mistakes. Okay. So now let's skim it, starting the explaining from the first passage. Sarp, I want you to skim the first passage. Just look at this passage and build your own sentences.
Well,
You don't have to make more, so many sentences, just a couple of phrases.
hold on, sorry, I have food in my mouth. Okay, so could you repeat again?
So can you skim it, just look at and summarize it?
All right, so there's a doctor at an hospital, and he walks into an operating theater, and he sees that none of the doctors or nurses are wearing any masks. And the operation ends up being a success. And a few days later, the same patient comes, and they found out that the patient has an infection, and the doctor thinks that it's probably because none of the doctors used masks during the operation.
Thank you very much. Excellent definition.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, watch the next skimming, the second passage.
The
Just-
second part.
Yeah, second part. Just look at this and build your own phrases.
Like the entire second paragraph.
Yes.
Okay, let me see.
You don't need to read it. Just look at and make your own phrases.
Can you kind of hold on? Sorry. By make my own phrases, what do you mean exactly? I'm a bit lost here.
As Sarp did it, have just done it here. He built his own sentences. For example, starting, this book tells that doctors need
Yes.
to get things right. If surgeons run through perform a simple checklist before
Yes.
operation, they can save lives like this. And it's proven. And an experiment was carried out, and in this experiment, doctors required to use a 5-point checklist before performing the operation. And in this 5-point procedure, they needed to wear rubber gloves, wash hands before and after, and to save lives. And they think around 8 lives were saved thanks to this procedure. And it reduced infections by 66%, like this. So skimming and summarizing is kind of this. So I want you now do for third passage, Boğaçan.
Okay. Let me see. In his book, Gawande, is that how you read his name? Her name? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Okay.
It's the surname.
Surname. Gawande looks at other professions too to support his argument that checklists reduce accidents, improve success rate. Let me see how I can. Can we say bring down instead of reduce? That kind of feels like it will work. Yeah. It brings down accidents and improves success rate. He draws attention to people like engineers and pilots.
Draw attention. Thank you.
Yeah, you use checklists all the time, and he makes up some good examples. Makes up. I don't think that does that work.
Yes. And he gives examples. Right. For example, what kind of examples? It's not a good examples, but it's life, of course.
Yeah.
He warns us, imagine.
I'm sorry, what?
He warns us about the possible risk, the possible danger.
Yes.
Why an airplane can crash then?
Yes, because the pilot couldn't follow the basic procedures.
Yes, and how about the skyscraper? Why does it fall down?
Yeah, because the engineers didn't enforce the building, I think. By important calculations, I think that's what they mean. Like build a strong base.
Yeah. And it would be an immediate inquiry, investigation to look into these events, and they can be, arrested. They could be arrested because of this failure. And this man warns people.
Yeah, it's like if they use checklists, then why shouldn't doctors?
And how about doctors? So should they use it or not for your own?
I think they should. It can come in handy when you least expect it. Checklists are good.
I worked in hospitals as a translator, and I noticed that in Turkey, the doctors, they not only use checklists, but also they use sounding. They use checklists. So gloves are worn, yes. So operation theater is ready, yes, like this. Patient is ready to be operated, yes, like this. So they sound in Turkey. I think it's a kind of very immediate thing and a very serious procedure.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, in Turkey we do it. And let's sum it up and end the class. So, and here the writer tells us that not only doctors or engineers or pilots, and we all should use checklists for our daily life. And that's all. We will
teacher break time.
Yeah, break time at end of the class. We will answer the questions tomorrow. So Berkay teacher will be with you and you will answer the questions. Okay. And go on with conditionals 0, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Okay, thanks to you. for your attention. Take care. Stay home. Stay
too.
safe.
You too. Thanks.
Okay.
See you next
Take
week.
care. See you. Take
Bye.
care.